Right, okay, well, we're back to the fairy tale in this act. You know, we sort of, it was a bit like a fairy tale to start with. It's amazing that the sailors were all in love as well with the princess in a way. It was the Prince Geoffrey Roudel's dream that kept them all going, that they believed in. They were so anxious to see the princess. They believe they're going to see the princess. And then the recent act that we looked at last week, it began to be rather doubtful whether they would go or not. And the last act was much more psychological action, wasn't it? It was Melisande and Bertrand struggling with their attraction for each other, and almost about to betray the trust that Rudel had put in them. Fortunately, the white sail was still there, and oh gosh, what's this from? Sorry, I've got something stuck on my screen. Yes, so that was much more psychological action. Now we're back to the story again, and surely nothing else can go wrong now, can it? When we open Act 4, surely the princess is on her way. Rudel, as we know, is still alive. We hope still hanging in there. But no.
Still showing that.
Do we need to say, sorry?
I muted. I think it was an accidental.
Okay. Do we need to recap Act 3 any more than that? Any questions for Act 3 before we go on to Act 4?
I have questions about Act 3 in retrospect, but I think they need to be saved for the end. So okay. I'll hold them.
All right. Okay. So we'll launch ourselves into Act 4, and we're back on the boat now. And the day has been going along normally, and we saw it was a hot, sultry afternoon when Bertrand and Melisande were struggling with their attraction. Now the day is coming to an end, and it's a beautiful sky, a red and gold sky. The scene is being set for something wonderful to happen. And we know now that it will happen. And it should all be plain sailing, if you'll forgive the pun. But what do we find on board the boat but Squarciafico, who has come to make trouble? Squarciafico is there because he wants revenge on Bertrand. If you remember, when Melisande found Bertrand practically strangling him, she didn't stop to ask what was the suggestion. She probably guessed what was the suggestion in Squarciafico's mind. She simply banished him there and then on the spot to please Bertrand. This was right at the beginning of the act, actually. And here now is Squarciafico actually on board the ship and causing trouble and hoping to cause trouble as well, because he wants his revenge. And the sailors won't believe him because they don't want their beautiful vision destroyed. They cling to their vision. The patron, the person in charge, the boss of the ship, the master of the ship, says, you better give him a fair hearing, And what Squarciafico is saying is she loves him and he loves her, and that's why they are late. But you see how determined the sailors are not to lose their wonderful vision. And as for Rudel, he is lying there inert. We are told that he can't hear anything. He can't say anything. And so he cannot hear these terrible things Squarciafico is saying about Bertrand's disloyalty, possibly, and the fact that the Princess Lointaine won't come because she's in love with Bertrand. The sailors really, really are angry, aren't they? And they want to get rid of Squarciafico. They want to throw him out. They want to throw him overboard. The master of the ship says, look, hold on. You can't do that. There's some key things that they say here. One of the sailors says, "We will never admit anything bad about our princess."
Mhm.
And later on, another sailor, Pigglefast, says, "Your malice smears our own idol, the idol we all love." As Squashifico says, "I'm just opening your eyes."
Mhm.
But another sailor says, "Perhaps we want to keep them shut." And they
Mhm.
want to keep them shut because it's their vision. And Francois put it very bluntly, we know what you want. You want to take away our princess, our far princess from us, and we're going to string you up to the mast.
May I interrupt to ask you a question about that? Is that okay? Okay. So this is one of my first questions. First was Squarciofico's motivation. I understand his motivation in terms of the plot of the play. I'm wondering about his motivation symbolically. If there's, now this might get us into some of the bigger questions that I have, but if we're with the princess as the metaphor for the ideal, or maybe the artistic ideal, that we'll have to talk about that later. But,
yes.
Squarciofico has been presented as the kind of materialist only after material gain, and that's the only thing that makes something useful. But so is there something metaphorically that you think we're supposed to understand in his motivation here, or is it just pure revenge? I was trying
Well, you've pointed out that he's a materialist, and the play is supposed to contrast idealism with materialism, and the materialism that Rostand felt was the norm in his society at the time, which is 1895. So yes, there is something of that. Squarciofico is certainly the symbol of something.
I was trying to understand, because there's the idea of being a materialist and being blind to the ideal, but then there's also this deliberate kind of attack on idealism, which seemed like in Rostand's mind that must stand for something too, that the ideal is under attack from the materialists, not just that they're incapable of seeing or appreciating the ideal, but actually seeking to undermine
it. I certainly, in the play, this is what's happening. I'm not sure how far it was meant to go.
Okay.
I think this is a fairy tale in which a special artist stars, and that's Sarah Bernhardt. Certainly, I think subconsciously, hopefully, the audience will react against the materialism of Squarciofico. And yes, and there's something very touching in the sailors' loyalty to their far princess and to the idea, the vision. We could call it a vision if you like. It is, as you were. I mean, I think you've touched on something important here, Lisa, because there is this conflict throughout the play between the imagination, which causes you to have a vision, an ideal, and reality, fact, reason. So, sorry, Smond is always talking about what is reasonable, what is sensible. There is definitely this thread running right through the play, yes.
And in terms of connections or early presentations of themes in Rostand's work, this is the conversation about "I'm a friend who's opening your eyes, and if we want him closed," it felt very Chanticleer to me.
Yes.
When he discovers that he doesn't make the sunrise, that changes nothing. Ultimately, that changes nothing about his role in bringing people to the ideal.
Yes, that's right. And in this case, of course, in this play, the ideal is realized in that the far princess will make her appearance. But in Chanticleer, he had to learn that he was wrong, and that it wasn't exactly an ideal, but more of a belief, wasn't it, for Chanticleer? He believed this was his job, this was his duty to raise the sun, and he had to be disabused. But once he was disabused, and realized his song didn't make the sun rise, he still went back and carried on with his duty.
Mm-hmm.
And duty in this play presumably is really loyalty.
Yeah, and there it just struck me as there was something very similar, because Melisande kind of learns the same lesson that he does, having to put back on her mantle and seeing the effect that she's having on the men who journeyed to see her, felt to me like Chanticleer still singing to the sun, because in Chanticleer there was that line about well, if you don't make the sunrise, and he says, then I open the eyelid. I make people wake up to the sun, even if I don't make the sunrise. And so there's just I felt a parallel in the sense of, oh, I need to be here representing, in Melisande's case, or singing of the ideal, so that I can help people move toward it, or bring them towards the ideal.
She said, I mean, when she was talking to the pilgrims, she certainly afterwards said to Rorismond that she felt it was her duty to keep this dream alive, because it was such a beautiful dream, and the vision of the poet. But she did admit to Rorismond that she was finding it more and more of a burden.
Well, that's where it seemed, I didn't realize until this last act that Melisande, I think, is Rostand. It's a funny.
Oh. Oh, I don't know about that.
You don't know about that?
Might be going a bit far.
Okay, well, I'll hold that. But just the idea of the artist's responsibility to represent the ideal. It's strange. I know it's a strange way to see it, and I felt it keep shifting for me in terms of, and I don't want to be too literal about making this into some kind of I don't know, parable, or it's not a parable, but
a fairy story.
A fairy story, but just the idea of the artist's responsibility to present the ideal, because people need that to.
I think, yes. Oh, absolutely, it is. And of course, if we think back, the ideal is actually Roudel's ideal. And if Rostand is present in this play, I think he's probably in Roudel. He's the one who's having the vision and has inspired all this. He's inspired this epic voyage, and all the sailors believing in his dream. He's inspired loyalty in Bertrand, which is rediscovered just in time. And of course, he's inspired something in Melisande that she didn't have before. Melisande is still looking for something, remember? Do you remember? She's still looking for something, and she hasn't yet found it. Maybe when she comes to visit Roudel, she will find what she's looking for.
So I'll just make one. I absolutely see that. I know probably from you and your biography, Rostand's struggle to bear the responsibility of the idealistic poet. And I just saw that struggle in the character of Melisande, which is, it's not that she represents him exactly, but she seems to embody that aspect of his struggle. In
fact, yes, you're right. I mean, this is very perceptive, because Melisande is the woman who is living as a woman, and she has reactions as a woman, and she can't help falling for Bertrand, being a woman, and him being a very handsome, lovely young man who's just beaten the Chevalier aux Armes Vertes, who was keeping her prisoner. The thing is, we don't have to think of Rostand as just in one of the characters.
Right, sure.
And you could say that Roudel is Rostand at his idealistic best. Melisande is the Rostand who's alive and actually struggling in real life.
I love that.
Yes, in my book, I do explain this struggle, really, that he had, because he was just a man, and a man of his time as well. So yes, this is very
and that's funny, because that's very Chanticleer too, because Chanticleer is almost lured away by love, right? Love.
Oh, well, yes, exactly. Oh, well, no, the whole thing, once you get into it, I mean, I think I've mentioned before, there's this Rostand favors what he called chaste love, pure love, the love of one soul for another, that comes out in all the plays. And that is the ideal. That is his ideal. Yes.
Thank you for letting me interrupt with it.
No, it's very interesting. It raises all sorts of correspondences. I mean, that's the thing. He was writing all these plays. In my book, I go into this in some detail about his attitude to women, and in theory, if you like, and in real life, which is a bit different, I'm afraid, from the ideal. Yeah, he couldn't always live up to his ideal. So the master of the ship wants to give Squasifico a fair hearing, but as soon as Squasifico says that he begins to become really nasty, and he says, "Oh well, he may not be able to hear what I'm saying, but do make sure that he hears when he can all about Bertrand," and it is just sheer malice. I'm just hang on, I've lost the page now. They get so angry with him, they're going to do all sorts of him. Then they have this rather humorous episode where he says, "Yes, but I'm from Genoa, you can't do this," and they all pretend to bow down and so on. But of course that is a joke, and they then throw him in the water. But I'm trying to find the bit where, yes, that's right. Squasiafico says, "Well, if Bertrand does dare to come and pretends in front of the man he has betrayed, tell him that Rudel hated him after what he was told." Now that is sheer malice, and the patron was not going to do that. And he says, "Right, over to you. You can do what you like with him." And then he gets thrown in. And of course, I mean, being Rostand, he's such a man of the theatre. I mean, it would not have been a very good act, would it? If everything had gone sweetly and lightly, you had this lovely scene on the boat, and there is Rudel and everyone looking after him, the sailors looking forward to and believing strongly that the princess would come. But no, we have Squasiafico and this interlude, and he's thrown into the water. And of course he can swim, so he's okay. But just when they are going to fire an arrow at him, that's when Rudel sees something and reacts very, very quickly, even though he can't do anything. I mean, he's being watched, of course, by Erasmus and the others. And this, it's just like last time when Bertrand was finally won over by Melisande. That's when they saw the black sail. And now here they see what they have hoped to. So Squasiafico is swimming to shore and he's out of the story. And just when he's about to be shot with an arrow, Rudel is seen by Erasmus to lift his hand very, very slowly and point to something. And he's seen something. And they forget all about Squasiafico and start to look. And then we get this lovely description, which is very similar to the description of Cleopatra's galley, of course, in Shakespeare, and also an earlier play that Sarah Bernhardt was actually Cleopatra in. And we're back in the fairy tale now. This is going to be beautiful.
I have to put a little punctuation mark on this element of this opening scene, that so even in the stage descriptions at the very opening, it says Rudel has not moved a muscle and his eyes seek the shore. So all this squabbling is going on among the men who are defending their ideal against course, Yofiko, but still they're caught up in all the squabbling about it, while he, meanwhile, is just fixed on the shore and not participating in any of this. And then that moment of just the hand coming up and pointing.
It's so dramatic, isn't it?
But also,
Yeah.
just as an image to take away, in the midst of chaos and squabbling over things, to just see that hand rising up and pointing in the distance to the
Very
ideal.
dramatic. Yes. At this
love
stage,
that.
we don't know. We don't know. We assume Rudel has not heard any of this and has taken no interest at all, because he is focused on his dream coming true. He is focused on looking for Melisandre's ship. Yes. and the descriptions are lovely. I mean, you know, even reading it, you can see what a beautiful sight it must have been on stage. And later on, when Sarah Bernhardt got a bigger theatre, Rostand was hoping to put La Princesse Lointaine on at her bigger theatre, where they could have even more spectacle. That didn't actually happen in the end. But you can still imagine what it's like. It's every sense is drawn in here. It's the sight of a beautiful ship. It's the music. It's the scent. Perfume does play a large part. And I think someone actually says, in this case, you know, perfume is using for the right purposes, not to enchant a man into loving a woman, but to enchant the senses in a beautiful, in the right way, to make everyone ready, to make everyone receptive. I thought that was quite a good point. So we have just to imagine this. We can't be in the audience, but you can imagine what an effect it had on the audience. And there we are. And eventually they quickly hustle Rudel out of the way, because he is really looking, they don't want to upset Melisandre. He's looking so awful. But they take him off and they dress him up as a prince. So he's not there when Melisandre steps ashore. And this, again, is a very... And I love the way that the sailors all throw their rags. I mean, they've hardly got anything left to wear. They throw their rags down so that she can walk on them. And then here we are in scene 2, where she's actually arrived. Yes. And before she comes on, there's this dramatic silence. You know, we've had a lot of movement. The music has stopped. The ship draws to a close, and it's absolute silence. Another wonderful entrance for Sarah Bernhardt. You can imagine how she carries this off, can't you? And she has moved from her beautiful ship to this ship, which has been through terrible times, is almost a wreck, really. Broken pieces of mast falling all over the place, you know, and the misery of the sailors. They look terrible. They've been through this terrible time. And she is actually absolutely overwhelmed. And this is, I think this is a very moving moment. I'm certainly moving for the sailors, everyone, in fact, on board. And it really brings out the best in Melisandre, isn't it? And she is overwhelmed by this, what they've gone through to see her, for this vision of her. And she had no idea how awful things were. I mean, she'd heard the story from Bertrand, but until she actually stepped on board the ship, she hadn't realized what they'd been through to come and see her and to bring Rudel. And it's lovely that she says, "You are my friends," to the sailors. "Oh, my friends." And of course, that's lovely. And then they say, "Oh, these sad people in rags with haggard looks. They've been through all this for my sake, or rather for Rudel's sake, but for the sake of this dream." And she realizes now, of course, she had to come. She's done the right thing. She had to come. She's very glad she came. And then she can't resist a little shudder when she says, "And where is Rudel?" And then they warn her. He's very bad, and his face. And she says, "I will overcome my emotion." And in that case, Frere Trophim steps aside, and there is Rudel. This must have been so moving in the theatre. I mean, just reading it, I find it very moving. And he opens his eyes and smiles at her. Mm-hmm. She says, "Oh, goodness, to think that I might never have seen this smile." It really, really makes her. And then the good news for Melisande and for Bertrand, Frere Trophim, he has not one instant doubted that you would come. He has never doubted. He cannot hear and he cannot talk, and maybe not able to see very well, but in fact he was the first to see you. And Melisande is amazed that he hadn't one moment doubted. And then one of the sailors lets it out of the bag because he says, "Oh, we didn't doubt either." "Ah, what's that about?" And the master says, "Shh, silly man." And Francois carries on and lets the real cat out of the bag. He says, "Yes, even when the man from Genoa was telling us these things," and Melisande is terrified, and Bertrand very upset. He's just come on board, and Frere Trophim says he heard nothing, but Rudel says, "Yes, I heard it all." "What could you have thought? What shame!" And he puts their mind at rest. And Rudel had thought to himself, or he said he thought to himself, "What is this wicked man? What stories is he telling?" But he says, Geoffroy says, "I didn't say anything because I knew you were going to come. You were going to come. Vous alliez arriver. And so I didn't need to worry. Didn't need to take any notice of these words anyway." And Melisande, you can imagine, is relieved. And Geoffroy insists even further, "I didn't even listen to him. I was looking for you. I was looking out at sea. And I had a feeling that I had to keep looking out because I felt that my silent look would call to you as if it was a loud voice, and that the force of my faith, or the force of the faith of my look, would bring you to me irresistibly, would be." And of course, you could say perhaps that's what happened, I'm sure we've all had experiences when we felt very strongly suddenly we had to go and see somebody, and it was at a moment when they were very needing our help. And this is the same sort of idea, but his faith was so strong, he felt, that Melisande would inevitably come. And he says, "And here you are."
I love this line to reflect that steadiness of his confidence that this ideal would be realized. He says, "For words are," this is in translation, "for words are counted when the breaths oppress, to keep my words, each one for the princess."
Yes,
wasn't going to waste his breath on the squabbling of the sailors. He
exactly
was saving it for her.
And he says, so he's comforted Melisande, and he says to Bertrand, "Surely you didn't think me capable of thinking the worst of you simply because of this wicked stranger." And all Bertrand can do is kiss his hand. And Geoffroy repeats again, "Yes, my faith was rewarded. You are here. You are here, and I have all I dreamed of." And there's some almost religious words sometimes. I'm not sure how that. When Rudel says, You are here. I have all I dreamed of, and smiles, and he says, the princess has come. Ave. Now that means hail, but also, of course, there is the famous Catholic Ave Maria, Ave Maria. And then, of course, he can't manage to say any more. And Bertrand wants to relieve his guilt, doesn't he? And he says to Frère Trophime, he doesn't have to say anything. He just looks ashamed. And Frère Trophime says, no, that would be comforting for you, but it would be the wrong thing to do. It's very wrong. It's cowardly, in fact, to do that, to trouble simply so that you don't feel so bad, to trouble his last hour. Keep the silence and let him die in peace. But when he's dead, says Bertrand, then he will know how I did deceive him. But of course, Trophime says, yes, but his soul will only be just full of sympathy and pity for you. So that is Bertrand's part. We come back to Mélisande now. Is there anything else we ought to be saying about that?
I don't think so, but I did. The treatment of Bertrand was so beautiful, and you can see how that is, each thing that Rudel does is bringing the best out of Bertrand and Mélisande.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then we have a very important speech by Mélisande, quite a long speech. In fact, several long speeches, well, two. And she is going to incarnate his dream in herself. And I love this line in French. I don't know how it's translated, but the third line in this long speech, en croyant à des fleurs, souvent on les fait naître. If you believe in flowers, you often make them bloom.
She says, trusting a flower, its bloom we sooner see.
That's right. I think it sounds better in French. Yes, but of course it all sounds better in French, yes. And then the key thing here is, la dame qu'il voulut me croire, je veux l'être. I want to become the woman he dreamed I was. And this is a change in Mélisande. Now, this is no longer a duty. This is something she wants to do. She wants to become the ideal that he had dreamt of. And this is what she's been looking for, something all her life. And here it is. Yes. And she says, it may cost me a grievous effort, but I must do that. And I must let him have a quiet, peaceful death. And so now she's going to aim to make Rudel's last minutes as beautiful as possible. And so she calls for petals, flowers to fall around him, perfumes, incense, harps to sing, and to make his passing peaceful. And she will try to distract him with her smile. And music will come to add chastely to our physical madness. What's he rest? Drunkenness, that's right, yes. Yes. And this is where Rudel is reaching his end, basically. She leans over him. There's incense, the flowers are being raining around them, music, the harps, and Geoffroy opens his eyes, and there is Mélisande leaning over him. Now, this is almost an echo of when Mélisande was leaning over Bertrand in Act 3, with the result that we know. And so this time she is in the right place. And another long speech by Mélisande. And here she tells him, which perhaps he didn't know, that she knew all about his love for her. And she felt that he was there in the evenings talking to her. And when she wept, he would feel her tears. It's a lovely speech, that, isn't it? And she repeats again, you see, I have come, and today we will be married. Well, that's quite a surprise. But that's why the music is playing. That's why you can hear the bell in the distance. You can scent the cypress, the sandalwood, and the roses, because today is our wedding day. And he is amazed. Are you sure of this? And she says, how do you find your princess? And yes, she's just as I hoped, says Geoffroy. I find this a lovely scene. It is so moving. Here is Rudel, who his dream has come true. And you know, it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And she says her long hair is escaping. Well, soon she will let her hair down. That's a very romantic thing to do, isn't it? And he mentions her jewelry, which he immediately gives her ring, her amethyst ring. And she says, that is the right color for our sad happiness. And in fact, amethyst apparently is a symbol of martyrs and where are we? Yes, piety and chastity. It's the color that bishops wear for that reason. So there's a symbolism there, the amethyst ring. She puts her collar, her necklace, if you remember the necklace she found so heavy, she puts it round his neck. I mean, he's lying down, so he's all right. And she lets her hair down so that it covers his face and his head. And she says in the comparison she uses, you are like Jason, who went seeking the golden fleece, and my hair is the golden fleece for you. You are a hero. You are an epic hero. You're a mythic hero, she says to him. And here are my hands. Here is my voice, that you can hear my tender, submissive voice. And then Geoffroy says, are you not frightened of my eyes that are already going grey and glassy? And she kisses his eyes. And then he says, are my feverish lips, do they make you afraid? And she puts her lips on his lips. And there is silence for a moment. You can just imagine that in the theatre, can't you? And Geoffroy comes, calls to Bertrand. And Bertrand's duty now is to be the voice of Rudel, to thank the sailors and introduce them to Melisande. I'm sure this raises an echo in you, Lisa, from Cyrano, where Bertrand introduces the sailors to Melisande. Yes, where Cyrano has to introduce the
cadets of Gascony.
Exactly. And this is another theme that you find throughout Rostand, actually, that it is ordinary, simple people, not the clever ones, not the rich ones, not the fancy ones, the ordinary people who just work normally and do the work. Like he says, these sailors are spontaneous, they have open souls like children, and obscure people they are, but they were the ones who worked hard to bring Rudel to him in active devotion. This is, I mean, there's a whole poem which Rostand wrote, which I'm sure you found, about the wheelbarrow, the old lady pushing the wheelbarrow. I can't remember when he wrote it. I think Jesus sees the old woman pushing the wheelbarrow, and it's so very heavy. I'm doing this from memory. I forgot to look it up. And he sees the barrow and says, may it be full of stars. And the barrow empties of its great weights and becomes full of stars. I mean, this is the sort of ideas that Rostand loves to have. And he always felt that ordinary people could receive any message more simply and more definitely than the rich and clever. And he takes that idea again in his next play about the woman of Samaria. He is very explicit in that play about, and then it's Jesus talking in the woman of Samaria and saying, thank you, Lord. He thanks his Father in heaven that simple people, simple hearts are the most ready to receive his message. So it's another theme that is already, nearly all his themes are in this play.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the death of Geoffroy in Mélisane's arms. And she tries to comfort him.
And this beautiful line from Frère Trophime, when she says, good priest, alas, ought you alone to watch his spirit pass? And he says, no, lady, love is holy. 'Tis God's road. Who dies for love dies in the grace of God.
Yes, that's very well put, actually, isn't it? Yes, exactly. And later on it says something about you don't need the trappings of a church, of the church for a dying person. This is a beautiful death. That's what they want to give Rudel, a beautiful death here. And just after that line that from Frère Trophime, Mélisande says, how beautiful our love is. All our souls have simply mingled their wings, which it's again the idea that this kind of love is higher and more pure than ordinary love. And then as he is beginning to die, the whole company starts to say the prayers for the dead, led by Frère Trophime. And this is going on in the background in Latin, which is quite good because it's not distracting. This is the background. And Mélisande wraps him in her arms and says, I love you. And you can hear the prayers in the background. And please keep talking, he says, please keep talking, because I can feel death approaching. If you talk to me, I will not fear. And so she carries on. I thought of you in the evening. I used to think of you, and I used to sit by the myrtles. And in the morning, I held silent, secret conversations with you. And he says, please talk. And as I walked under the lilies, she says, if one of them leant over, it seemed to make a sign to me, as if it was the only worthy confidant of such a royal love as our own, and so pure. So you think lilies here very symbolic, royal lilies, lilia regalis, isn't it? And blank white lilies. And she says, I used to confide to the lilies that I loved you. Carry on talking, says Geoffroy. And I used to, and she repeats the last line, and he says, I'm going. I have nothing more to wish for. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Mélisande. How many people, worn out like a journey such as mine, die without seeing their princess lointaine? Mm-hmm. But she says, this is quite surprising, really. She says, yes, but also how many people have actually, they don't die until after several, after they've been disenchanted. They've lost their love for each other. That seems to me rather cynical, actually, but there you go. And mieux vaut repartir.
Can I suggest a less cynical spin on it, because I struggled?
Yes, please do, because I was shocked by that.
Well, maybe I'm reading into it, but when I read those lines, that what came to my mind was Ode on a Grecian Urn, and the opening scene when it says forever young and forever still in love. It's described.
Oh, right, I see what you mean. Yes.
Kind of frozen on the side of the urn. So
yeah.
to me, this is the power of art aspect of idealism.
Yes, I'm sure you're right. And in fact, she picks up the same idea later in the speech, doesn't she? And you will not know that rather grey sadness of the idol, which becomes familiar. I mean, to him, Melisande has still the aura of the stranger, the far princess, and that is magical for him. Yeah.
And I just think of art. So yeah, there was even "Thou'lt see me always wrapped in light sublime, for the first time, forever the first time." So while it's true that they're meeting and then he's dying, you could apply this equally in a situation in which they're both still very much alive, that you have to preserve that vision and that ideal in the context of the relationship.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yes. And now she almost lifts him so that he can see the sunset. This is very dramatic, isn't it? And a very romantic scene, dying in front of a sunset. The sky is now purple, purple and fiery. And she tells him, "You're dying the death of a poet and a prince. In love, in grace, and in majesty, blessed my God." And this is where she says, without the importunity of religious objects, such as vials, little phials of medicine and so on. "And there's nothing ugly or bitter about your death before a sunset over the sea." You can't really get much more romantic than that, can you? It just is just perfect. And you can imagine how the audience were moved, and he dies. But he's still holding her hair, and she simply cuts it off. Bertrand cannot cope with this. Oh no. And she won't even look at him. She says without turning around, "Who is saying that?" Sorry. "It's too much. And it's you, Bertrand. No, but we must renounce. It is necessary. It's impersonal. It is essential to renounce." And here is the key. My soul finally understood it had to look after another soul. "Et je suis différente. Et du bien que j'ai fait, déjà s'atteste en moi le merveilleux effet. Qu'étiez-vous, rêve, amour, rose rouge ou lys blême, près de ce grand printemps qu'est l'oubli de soi-même." So the forgetfulness of herself is what she's always wanted, and now she has it. She has forgotten herself in her desire to make Bertrand happy. Bertrand understands what is coming, because she says, "I will now take the veil." That's what it means, really. And he says, "Hélas." But she is giving up the rest of her life now. And then she throws her jewels amongst the sailors. What a dramatic gesture. She rips them off her clothes and throws them out towards the sailors. And she says, "Oh, I'm glad to get rid of these heavy, unnecessary things. Please gather them. I'm not paying you for your trouble. You can pick them up because it's the payment for your love. And it's because the princess loves you." So that's a nice distinction to make, isn't it? And "Je vous jette mon cœur." I'm throwing you my soul as well amongst these jewels. And oh, what a relief. How much lighter her cloak is now. Divinely lighter. "But what shall I do?" says Bertrand. "What am I to do? What about me?" "Well, you better go on a crusade," she says. And the The sailors leap at the idea. Yes, yes, we want to do this. And so they're going to burn the ship which carried the Rudel. That's perhaps an echo of mythology, isn't it? Wasn't King Arthur sent down the corpse of King Arthur in a burning boat? I think, I can't remember it was, but this is what they used to do anyway. And we will follow the chief, the chef, and that's Bertrand. So Bertrand is going to lead them. He's going to lead them to Jerusalem. And she retreats to her ship. Don't weep, she says. I am going towards the calm and peace. And at last I know what is essential. And Frère Trophime has the last word. Yes, he repeats himself. Great love works for the sky, the heavens. Yes. You can imagine the impression made on the audience of this scene. In fact, the first night was a huge success with the audience. The critics were not happy with it. For one thing, a lot of them thought it'd be another jolly little play like the Les Romanesques, the Romantics. The symbolists weren't happy because they thought you shouldn't have a life at all. The symbol, they didn't think it was true to their ideals. I mean, the most extreme symbolist says, one of them says, "Oh, living, our servants will do that for us." But the power of the critics in those days, I mean, Paris in those days, the theatre of Paris was so important to everyday life. It held a huge place in everyday life. Reviews were on the front page. So a critical review really meant the death of a play in a way. Sarah Barnhart carried on with it for another 30 days, I think, but then she had to pick up a play by Sardou for the rest of the tenancy of the theatre. But she did play it in England. When she was in England, she believed in the play, and she asked Rostand to write her another one, which was The Woman of Samaria, which I have done an English version of, and it's on Kindle or it's in print with another play. But that is the same ideas crop up in La Samaritaine, but that is actually a gospel story from St. John's Gospel. And I'm sorry about, well, do you mind if I just say that if you want to know more about La Princesse Lointaine, I've got a whole chapter in this book, which is The Man Who Was Cyrano. Is that coming out all right?
Yes, I'll put a link to it in the in the
Thank
chat.
you. Yes, and you can just read the relevant bits on Kindle. It's just pages 84 to 95. So you don't even have to buy the book on Kindle. You're allowed to read just the pages, 84 to 95, because I developed the ideas a lot more there. But I'd love to know whether people enjoy. Oh, thank you, Lisa, for the link. Amazon won't do, I'm afraid. They don't stock it.
Oh,
you have to get it
I'll
through
link
your
it.
website. Yeah,
I'll find that.
Amazon is not friendly to small publishers. I forgot what I was going to say now. I hope
You wanted to ask.
play.
You wanted to ask people, I think.
Whether people enjoyed the play.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, some people did.
If anyone wants to share. Yeah.
What did people think of? I mean, it's an unusual play. It's not. It's asking a lot of the audience in a way. If you want to delve beneath the spectacle, it's a lot to believe, isn't it? It's a lot to take in. But what a lovely vision.
Yes. Well, I think the reading it alone, I would have enjoyed it, but with your guidance, I feel like I understood so much more and got so much more out of it. One thing that struck me reading this last act is that, you know, from what I understand, I think from your book, the spirit of it was in defiance of the artistic standards of his age. I think verse was starting
Yes,
to go out of
absolutely.
favor. Romantic verse is going out of favor, and the symbolists, was Maeterlinck one of the
Well,
symbolists?
yes, I mean, there were a lot of plays at the time by Maeterlinck and Ibsen. Maeterlinck certainly had symbolic plays. Ibsen, the psychology, some critics didn't like the psychology of the act where Bertrand and Melisande are attracted to each other and have to fight this attraction. They said it was too much like Ibsen, these northern miserable plays about people trying to make sense of their lives. Yes, indeed.
So the play itself, so it's a play whose theme is about the need for an ideal, but then every aspect of the play is so uninhibitedly romantic,
Well, yes.
over the top romantic. So
I think that was for Sarah Bernhardt. She needed a place to develop her star quality, and this was her play. So that was partly that. And there were echoes of previous roles of hers, but certainly the ideas were his.
Yeah.
Yes.
Molly.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the play. I had read it before, but hearing you recount it step by step was both beautifully described, but also more suspenseful. Like I got a feeling of the gradual unfolding of the action.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciated reading it. So
it's hard, isn't it, to follow in a translation which is a little old-fashioned, but also if you're reading it and not seeing it on stage, it's hard. So yes, it was actually oh no, that was another one. No. Oh, I'm so glad that people did enjoy it and got something out of it. And all Rostand's ideas are here. They reappear in Cyrano, they reappear in Chanticleer, as we've tried to draw out. Yeah. What can I say?
I think the whole scene. Okay, at the beginning, when we started this, I was thinking of Melisande as facing the struggle of the person trying to maintain an ideal. And I think that's trying to hold on to an ideal vision. And I think that's true. But then when we got to the last act and she was the vision itself, then I started to get confused about how those things fit together, because it really seemed like she was the embodiment of the vision, and it was that vision that was being threatened, or it could be undermined in some way. So now if I step back from it, I think your suggestion that Rostand can be represented in many aspects of the play is what fits for me the best. That psychological struggle seems like the burden of the artist to maintain or uphold, create this vision that can inspire people. He feels that as a struggle and a burden sometimes, and so he seems to have put that struggle into this presentation of the ideal itself. But at the same time, he's Rudel, who's ever faithful to.
But Rudel is the artist who has this vision and clings to it and will not take any malicious gossip again. No, that's not what I wanted to say, actually. But he has his ideal and he clings to it. That's the thing. He clings to his ideal, Rudel, and in the end, it is fulfilled. And Chanticleer has an ideal as well, doesn't he? That eventually, if every cockerel sings for his own valley, eventually there will be no more night. That's Chanticleer's vision. I mean, these visions don't have to be possible.
Mhm.
They can simply free you up to work towards things.
Mhm.
And for Melisande, yes, she did find it a burden, but when she sees Rudel, she wants to become, she actually states, she wants to become the woman he thought she was.
Mhm.
And that's when she behaves like the Far Princess and says, look, am I beautiful? And listen to my voice.
Mhm.
She wants to be the embodiment of what he hoped for.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. Shoshana?
Yes, first I wanted to repeat what everyone said about how powerful it is to read it in your company, Sue, and slowly.
Thank you.
I think that slowly is part of what puts us in front of the unfolding events. And
Yeah.
and that's really great because, you know, speed reading is not for great literature. I mean, spending less of your time on it is not what we want. And that's in a way related to what the play is about, you know, which is how you use your mind and your spirit. Because I think that for me, I mean, I've read this before, but every time I somehow wish that there's a way for everything to work out for everybody. And
Well,
and that she kisses him and he comes back to life. You know,
yeah.
that's a fairy tale. But you know, I mean, within this play, the idea is that you can't actually have that. You can have the ideal, or you can have life, and if you can only have one or the other, there's a choice, and there's one right choice, and the other one's the wrong choice. And so Melisande and Bertrand living happily ever after, you know, cloistered
Yeah.
in the castle, that's the wrong choice. That would not, they wouldn't be happy. That wouldn't work.
That wouldn't
So
work, would it?
right. So there's one right choice, and by extension, that's available to everyone. You've got your one right choice of what you need to be loyal to, and you can any moment, you know, that's up to you. So it is a play that's for everyone, even though every time I read it, I get sucked into wanting somehow for things to work out existentially and not spiritually. But that's not the play. The play is it's either or, and you can only have one. And this is the one
Yeah.
right one, and everyone sees it.
I think part of the reason I feel so readily able to relate to it in that way is that if you see one or the other dying in the world, it's the idealist dying. It's not the effort to kind of realize material success. It's idealism that needs to be fought for, that element of life. I just finished reading with my students the Browning version. And the same dichotomy is set up in the Browning version because Crocker Harris has this idealized spiritual idea of love, and his wife is a definite materialist. And Crocker Harris makes this speech where he says, that they've wronged each other. She has her kind of love, I have my kind of love. Both of us have disappointed the other. But I always look at my students at that point and say, does the author really believe that? Does he believe they have equally wronged each other, or is he on the side of Crocker Harris? And they're always quite convinced that he's ultimately on the side of Crocker Harris. So, but yes, and at the same time, it feels they want that feeling of you can have both. You can have an idealistic love and it can be realized in reality. But I see these artists need to fight for the ideal.
Yes, and every individual gets a chance to make the choice in the play. In real life, you can sometimes have both, I think. But one of the points, to go back to what Shoshana was saying, I think it's so important to study great literature because this is where we learn so much. We learn how to deal with life, basically. And that's why I read great literature. In real life, of course, it's much more difficult than in a play. But
Yen, did you?
Yeah, there are a lot of things here as my first reading of it. There are a lot of things that we discussed here that I probably wouldn't have gotten until maybe like years later, or maybe both. And so this was very, very helpful. Kind of, in a way, it's made real life easier because we have this discussion. Like, you know, like you said, it's real life's harder, and then having this discussion makes it like accelerate my ability to take meaning out of the play. One thing that came out in this last act, and then with this last discussion, is that the ideal is that comes out when you love the ideal, that often it's not this, oh, it's that it's completely self-motivated. Like there's this back and forth that makes Melisande realize that she's she like you said, she was searching for something, and then she's like, oh, I know what I need. Now I know what I want. And that it's almost like, I mean, there, what was it? Was it Jack Nicholson in one of the movies? Was a big it was a big line, movie line, right? Like, you make me better, right? And I'm paraphrasing, but it's that feeling that you get from reading this last act, that she was searching for something she didn't know, and now she and the same, and it comes out in Bertrand too. And it's just this last act really wrapping up, like, oh, there's actually like the guilt element of Bertrand, right? And Melisande, but really comes out, I think, more in Bertrand in a way. And that malice doesn't matter with Seraphic. I like all of that gets wrapped up, and so it's not just a play about the ideal, but like all of the emotions around it, and that you have to deal with in real life. And again, that kind of thing, I think you sit with a play after you've seen it or read it, and this is the kind of thing that slowly comes out, like drips out at you, and you're like, oh, that's what that meant. And again, like I feel like I'm getting it condensed right now through this discussion, which is great. And yeah, that piece didn't come out to me until this last act and this discussion, because before it was just like, oh, it's a Rostand and the ideal, and I've seen that before, right? And this makes me go back. I want to go back and read all of his plays again and say, oh, yes, where was I missing all of this in his other plays? So thank you.
I like that description of all of the struggles around maintaining an ideal, because I think that is what makes me see Rostand as having put himself into every aspect of the story. Because if he's conceiving of, okay, we all need this faraway princess, we all need this ideal that we're sailing towards, and to have confidence that, you know, that this is, to have this as our star, our guiding star.
Well, we all need a dream, don't we? He calls it a dream, le rêve. Yes, a dream, a vision. Yes.
And then if he's starting, okay, so we all need a dream. So what is the conflict? Well, the conflict is being drawn away by things that would be, by the comfy cushions, by the things that would be distractions, is one thing that will inhibit the ideal. One is the ideal actually real in every sense, or do we need to content ourselves to close our eyes to certain aspects of it because we still need to be moving towards it, whether we believe it is can be fully realized in reality or not. The burden of being the representative of the idea. I mean, there's just and then the guilt that you were saying, Yen, of having been tempted away from it for a moment and then coming back. It just feels like those are all things that would be taking place in Rostand's soul as he's striving for the ideal himself and striving to be the artist who presents the ideal to the world. So yeah,
he felt very much he had the responsibility after the success of Cyrano to keep the idea of the ideal alive in people and in the theatre. As I mean, he couldn't always live up to it himself. I mean, who can really? But it was there, and he's so relevant still. He is just such a relevant writer. You know, I mean, they redid. Chanticleer had a revival in early 2020, something like that, and everyone thought it was a modern play. they didn't realize it hadn't been touched at all. It hadn't been touched. It was just the same. And if you look at the French, it is just ordinary, everyday French, not everyday perhaps, but, you know, normal French. And the ideas, of course, are still so relevant to us, aren't they? Yes. Thank you so much, Lisa, for giving me this opportunity of joining you, because these plays are so wonderful. We need these plays.
So grateful. Shoshana, did you have something else too?
Sure, just briefly, I see Luke put the reference in the chat. It's the Jack Nicholson film. It's called As Good as It Gets. And when he says she keeps asking to pay her a compliment, which I think, well, that's part of being loyal to some kind of ideal, is to acknowledge it. And what he comes up with is, you make me want to be a better man. And I think that actually does touch our play, you know, that this makes Mélisande want to be a better woman, makes Bertrand,
Yes.
it's everyone, they're all inspired. But just briefly, I never thought of it in connection with the Browning version, but there's a sense in which it does make sense, because he's someone, part of what he needs to do is to recognize what's important in his own life. And then there's the other teacher and the loyalty question and so on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And want to be a better man.
Right. And the wife, she's someone who has failed, which is why she's so unhappy. And I don't know if Radigan read it, but you know, what's her name? Her name's Millie.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, like a failed Millie, just saying. Yeah. And it's he could have known it too, because you know, Shaw reviewed it. It's part of theatrical history, but I never thought of mapping those two onto each other. But there's a sense in which that is an enduring subject of, you know, your ideal, your dreams, and what does it mean to live it through in your own life? What represents that?
Well, and you can see how mired in materialism that Crocker Harris is. Like, that's the world he's stuck in, and nobody has. His is a world in which no one has appreciation for the ideal. He just doesn't. He doesn't even have the sailors to accompany him on his voyage. He is so
that's why Taplow is important.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. This is so wonderful. Thank you, Sue, from the bottom of my heart, for continuing to be such an inspiration to me and guide me through these wonderful works. I'm definitely going to take part. Your translation for The Woman of Samaria. I need to read that now. I will be in touch with everyone with the details of our next project, which will be to read Voltaire with Alan Charles Cours. I cannot stress what a similar honor and privilege it is to have him guide us through that work. I'll share the details. I think most of you here know who he is, but he's a retired professor of intellectual history from the University of Pennsylvania, and one of the wisest and most wonderful, humane people I know. So it's only because he's now in retirement that he has the time to volunteer to participate in our course, but it's a great honor that he will do that. So I'll share those details. It'll be coming up pretty soon. So thank you again, and I will see everyone soon, I hope. And Sue, I'll see you in Minehead this summer at the very
yes, make sure you come.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.